purpose of this meeting is to give a little bit of information about how something like security can come to terms and reconcile sometimes conflicting goals with an open source software project. After speaking today, I'm hoping that each of us can go back to our own projects, our own repositories, or our own ventures and take some of these lessons that we as a security repository have learned and apply them to your own missions. The topic of today's talk will cover the agenda shown on screen. I'll start by defining what it means to be open source and how that is pivotal and instrumental in OpenSearch's mission. I'll then take a little bit of a closer look at the security repository before transitioning into the root of today's discussion, which is the open triaging meetings that Nate talked about before. Finally, I'm hoping to leave everyone with some lessons, some testimonials, and some tips to get started. So let's begin. All of us like to use the term open source to describe software. We all kind of have a value that open source software is better, but what does it really mean? Well, obviously open source is instrumental to OpenSearch itself. It's part of the name. It's in the commonly used description of an open source search and analytics suite. But again, what does it really mean? We can define open source software as software which is accessible, collaborative, and decentralized. However, once again, these terms can be a bit nebulous themselves, so I'd like us to take a bit of a closer look at each. The first of these terms is accessible. Shown on screen is a definition of what accessible software is as provided by Red Hat. We can see that an accessible software is software where anyone can see, modify, and distribute the code as they see fit. It's obvious how OpenSearch is accessible. Our code lives on GitHub, and we use the very liberal version 2 Apache license. This means for all intents and purposes, any one of us can take OpenSearch and use it for our personal or commercial purposes. The next term used to describe open source software was collaborative. Collaborative software is again defined by Red Hat on screen. OpenSearch is collaborative as it relies on peer review and community production. You're here today because you're interested in OpenSearch, and you've likely contributed to OpenSearch in some way. Whether that's by filing an issue, opening a pull request, or participating in a request for comment, each of us demonstrates the collaborative nature of OpenSearch when we work together to help further the project. The final term used to define open source software is decentralized. This is perhaps the most complex term as it relates to the definition of open source software, as again on screen, we can see a definition provided by Red Hat. Red Hat states that a decentralized software embraces the transfer of control and decision-making from a single organization. Open source software itself relies on the fact that no one company or organization is in control of the direction of the project. With OpenSearch, we see this in how many organizations and companies come together to voice their opinion on how the project should grow. I've just gone through the process of defining what it means to be open source. I want us to keep in mind the three terms of accessibility, collaboration, and decentralization throughout the remainder of the talk, and come to reflect on how these can be reconciled with the goals of a security repository. Shown on screen is a QR code, which you're welcome to scan, that will take you to the documentation homepage for the OpenSearch Security Repository and Security plugin. In brief, the OpenSearch Security plugin offers the features of encryption, authentication, access control, and then audit logging and compliance. These features are pivotal to what it means to be secure in OpenSearch. And every day, myself and other engineers work to help maintain the quality of this code base and further develop its features. As part of the process, we make use of something called tenets. Tenets are a commonly used practice in many software development companies and organizations. Each group generally has its own set of tenets, and shown on screen are the security repositories tenets. These tenets are ranked in their order of priority or importance, with the first being the most important. The purpose of tenets is to help guide the process of decision-making and project growth. Put plainly, anytime we come to face a decision which would pit some quality versus a quality listed in one of our tenets, we use the tenets to guide the outcome and decision we ultimately come to. Reviewing these tenets, we can see that the first and most important tenet of the security plugin is that quality and security form the foundation of our efforts. This should be self-explanatory. We're a security plugin. What else would we do? Well, in practice, this means that anytime we come to face a decision which would pit the security or quality of our code base against some other feature, such as accessibility, we'll always side in favor of the quality or security. The second tenet is that privacy won't be compromised. In a world where user data is constantly being harvested and exploited, OpenSearch makes a concerted effort to maintain the privacy of our users' data. The final tenet is listed at the bottom, and the one which we arose at through the process I'm soon going to demonstrate with you today. Now, I just listed the security tenets, which I said shaped the way we make decision makings. And as an example, I suggested that what happens when we come to a decision which would pit the accessibility of the code base versus its security or quality. I said we'd use the tenet to help us arrive at a decision where we'd focus on security, obviously. But before, I defined open source software as being accessible by nature. So what does that mean? How can we reconcile the conflicting goals of an open source project, which is also secure? In order to rectify this, the security plugin implemented its own open triaging process, which I'm going to walk you through shortly. Triaging is a process used by many open source or private software development communities where they review new issues for the repositories or code bases. Generally, the maintainers of a project will look over new issues, decide whether they want to enact on them, and often assign members to take on particularly high priority issues. This is the same process the OpenSearch Security plugin underwent previous to the institution of our open triaging meeting. Each week, we would meet privately to look at new issues and decide whether it was worth tackling. We said, is this something that we as the maintainers of the project want to see addressed? And if it was, an engineer such as myself or someone else on the team would be assigned to rectifying the issue as soon as possible. However, this did not contribute to the open source nature that we hope to exemplify. It's not accessible, it's not collaborative, and certainly not decentralized when the majority of the maintainers are from Amazon. As a result, we opened our open triaging meeting process and released our public triaging markdown file. Shown on screen is a capture of this markdown file. The triaging markdown file contains categories of an overview of the process, like I just described, details on how each and every community member is able to join each week, an agenda, which covers an agenda, and finally a label breakdown as shown on screen. These labels are the commonly used labels we apply during the triaging process and are used to dictate issues which we've reviewed. Anytime an issue is added to the repository, it's automatically assigned the untriaged label, representing the issue has not been reviewed during one of these meetings. Next, we have a triage label, which is assigned during these meetings to any issues which are deemed actionable and have clear closure criteria. Finally, issues can result in having neither label when they're reviewed in the triaging process, but lack either explicit closure criteria or actionable items on them. The last two labels are commonly used for helping get the community more involved with opening pull requests. Those are the help wanted labels, which dictate issues where the security plugin maintainers probably won't act on them themselves, but we would love to see a pull request from our community members. And then finally, a good first issue label. These issues represent problems which we feel someone new to either OpenSearch or the security plugin would be able to tackle and get their feet wet. Having demonstrated the process that we came to opening up our triaging meetings, I want to actually walk you through triaging issue together, and hopefully you'll come to see how this can help rectify the two conflicting goals of an open source project and a security plugin. So this is the triaging markdown document that I discussed before. Embedded are hot links that take us to the different categories we review as part of the agenda. After an initial gathering process, we'll go through any weekly announcements. Then we'll move on to the review of new issues. I'd like you each to participate in a triaging process as if you are a community member coming to our meetings. When I look at the new issues, we can see that we have 14 issues across the security and security dashboards repositories. In this process, we select the issues and note that they're labeled untriaged and sometimes another category of issue. We'll then begin the process of triaging them. In this case, we often read the title, so demo configuration script requires admin password documentation. And then we'll ask whether it meets the criteria for being assigned another label. As members, I'd love as you of the audience would participate. Recalling the labels I described before, does anyone feel that this has either actionable items or clear closure criteria for being able to be tackled? Feel free to raise your hand or speak out loud. That's a great question. That's something that we could definitely request being added because it's not necessarily clear how that would be done. So as Nate brought up, that's something where we could provide feedback to the filer of this issue. In this process, we'll then open up a comment that says something along the lines of triaged and then that feedback. That's the general process. Returning to the presentation, I'm hoping that you can get an idea of how this could help us reconcile the goals of a security plugin and an open source project. While this was somewhat shoddily done, you can imagine how attending each week, our community members are empowered to voice their own opinions and see how they can shape the project how they would like. We make the project accessible, collaborative, and decentralized through these processes, but it's not without its own fair share of challenges. Primarily, the challenges we've faced in the past year of running these open meetings have been around the prioritization of issues, community outreach, and handling of disruption. The first of these challenges, prioritization, arises from the fact that in traditional triaging meetings, as I mentioned before, maintainers are generally assigned to issues which are high priority. This creates an unfavorable community experience because someone could have their issue be left unassigned while another one gets assigned a maintainer. No one wants to attend a meeting and feel like their issue is being put second class or not being given the same level of precedence as someone else's. As a result, we've implemented a set of changes that I've listed on screen. Specifically, we stick to only triaging. By that, I mean we, under no circumstances, assign maintainers to tackle issues. This completely removes any of these instances where someone's issue could be assigned a maintainer who's going to tackle it immediately and someone else's will not. Similarly, we try to make it clear to the community members what steps they can take to get their issue in the best state possible when it's going to be triaged. By that, we stick to the explicit label criteria I listed before and make sure that any review of the issues sticks to the explicit labeling criteria. This is maintained regardless of whether it's an issue filed by another maintainer, a first-time contributor, or someone in between. Similarly, in cases where an issue may not have all the information, so as Nate pointed out, perhaps that user needed to provide a link to the documentation repository. Well, if they were in attendance, we could provide them that feedback, they could quickly make that change, and then we could assign it the triage label to be picked up shortly. Finally, in cases where even though we might not think an issue is something we want to see completed, we always ask for additional information to clarify. Just as no one wants to attend a meeting to have their issue immediately left unassigned, no one wants to see it immediately closed either. It creates a very uncomfortable dynamic and makes people unlikely to attend meetings or file future issues. Instead, we ask for clarification on issues if we think it's maybe not the right spot or sometimes a user error and say, could you provide additional information to help clarify us so that we can assign it the appropriate issue or redirect the user to the correct location. The second challenge we tackled was that around community outreach. When initially setting up the open triaging meetings, we went from a process of only internal maintainers to wanting to connect with our public community. How do you do that? Well, we got some great help from familiar faces you may know, those being Chris Verdane, Nate, and David Tepet. They helped set us up with sharing on social media, such as LinkedIn, as well as adding a banner to our repository homepage, which would notify any issue filers or anyone going to open up a new pull request that they could come to these weekly meetings. This greatly incentivized and made it easier for anyone looking to participate more actively in the development of the security plugin to come contribute in these meetings. Finally, with the release of the public Slack channel and the OpenSearch forum automation processes, we were able to set up automatic notifications for anyone interested in joining the meetings. This has been very successful, particularly in the public Slack, where we were able to automate the release of public meetings, and anyone who participates in the security Slack channel can see every week exactly when the meetings are, and they'll get a helpful reminder to join. The final challenge we face, and perhaps the most pernicious, has been that around handling disruptions. With the rise of COVID and the more frequent use of video conferencing apps such as Zoom, there have been many people who occupy themselves by sowing chaos through Zoom bombing. This is similar to photobombing, where people just join to run amok. In short, we were not immune to these problems. To help curb some of the behavior, we implemented a set of features, specifically waiting rooms, password protection, the requiring participants to list their names, and disabling screen shares. The first two of these changes were some of the initial suggestions offered by Chris. By enabling waiting rooms, we're able to evaluate whether someone has an inappropriate name before they can actually join the meeting. This prevents the most egregious and obvious attempts to cause issues in our meetings. Password protection is also helpful in avoiding any web scraping bots from being able to grab Zoom links and spam them with join requests. Many of the automated scripts used to promote this kind of behavior look for fully formed Zoom links so that they can automatically join. By removing the passwords from the links and requiring you to manually input them, they're unable to join. Finally, 7 months ago, we had a particularly bad bout of Zoom bombing and implemented the final two changes listed. Those are requiring participants to list their name in order to join, meaning we no longer allowed users to have a phone number or just iPhone, as well as disabling screen share for anyone that is not a host or co-host. This prevents anyone from maliciously taking over the screen share and showing inappropriate imagery. Since making these final changes, we've been without incident. Having discussed some of the challenges, I want to return to the main purpose of today's talk, and that is how have these changes made the security plugin more emblematic of its open source nature? Well, specifically, the three takeaways on screen have been applied not only to how we triage issues, but also how we run our repository as a whole. The first of these is our focus on action. Just as we require actionable criteria to label an issue triaged and provide actionable feedback when we request more information on issue, the security maintainers have made a commitment to focusing on action on the other ways we run our repository. This means we no longer leave issues to stagnate. We no longer leave pull requests without reviews. I'm sure we've all contributed to projects where we've opened up a pull request and received feedback that says, this is wrong. That doesn't help anyone. It makes a very uncomfortable situation where it's not clear how the filer of the pull request can improve their issue or pull request and see it brought to a close. Instead, we provide specific guidelines and specific action items to help see every pull request or issue brought to a close. This helps make our repository more accessible as it's always in a usable state, and we are able to more successfully iterate on our current version and drive features to close. The second takeaway is the use of our repository as a source of truth. This relates to the collaborative nature of our project. as it makes the maintainers more accountable. Returning to the definition of an open source software, collaboration means that everyone contributes to the development and peer review of the project. This means that we need to have some checks and balances for our maintainers. In this case, we use the repository as a source of truth to hold the maintainers accountable so that any community member is able to say, what do you mean my issue is not appropriate? Or why are you telling me that you don't want to see something changed in a specific way? If we don't provide our community members all the information we have on a timely manner, then we can't expect them to adhere to our guidelines or expectations. As a result, we use the repository as a source of truth and always release all information publicly on our repository as soon as possible. Finally, we make use of the practice and the belief that consistency drives commitment. I mentioned before that decentralization means that no one organization is in control of the growth or direction of our project. By offering consistency, we help further the commitment of all community members and all contributors to the security plugin. We're reliable in our development, and we're reliable on the frequency of hosting our open triaging meetings, weekly at the same time. You can get the automatic notifications, but I promise you we'll be there. And as a result, we're able to see input from many other organizations and companies and individuals who are able to voice their opinions on how they want to see the security plugin grow. This greatly benefits the decentralization of the security plugin. Now that I've talked about some of the more abstract takeaways, I want to begin wrapping things up by talking about some specific results. The first and perhaps most exciting is that since the implementation of the open triaging process, where we had 6 Amazon affiliated security plugin maintainers, we've had the honor of introducing 2 Ivan affiliated maintainers to the security plugin. These 2 contributors made consistent impact in both their codes and their commitment to showing up to these meetings. They provided valuable insight in their participation and providing additional details on any issues or pull requests that they knew about. A second result is that, quite frankly, we've been running these meetings for a year. We wouldn't be doing that if we didn't find them valuable or successful. And that is testament to itself and the success of them. A third result is that we've had other companies come, or other organizations, come to speak about the development of the security plugin as they would like to see fit for their own managed service products. This is particularly valuable in making sure that OpenSearch remains open source in practice and in identity. I work at Amazon, as do many of the other maintainers, but I'm fully committed to the open source identity of OpenSearch and the security plugin. So to have other companies come and speak about how they would like to see the security plugin grow is greatly valuable to me. In particular, as an example, I've recently had discussions with a company looking to enforce something called FIPS 140 compliance in the security plugin. The fact that another company would take valuable time for their engineers to come and speak with other maintainers and other organizations on how they want this open source project to grow exemplifies the open source identity and ideals of the security plugin and OpenSearch. A fourth result is that other projects and other repositories have begun to copy our method. Specifically, the search and search relevancy repositories, as well as the machine learning commons, have spoken with me and other maintainers of the security plugin and implemented their own versions of these open triaging meetings. This shows the effect that these are having on the project as a whole and shows that hopefully one day, all of the repositories will participate in a similar open triaging meeting. Finally, and perhaps the most concrete result, is that since the implementation of our open triaging meetings, the average time to close on the security and security dashboards plugins has gone from 14.4 days to 10.23 days. This is a concrete statistic that represents the improvement in velocity and development time that the security plugin has seen since the creation of the open triaging meetings. Before I leave you with a couple takeaways to get you started on your own process of implementing similar open triaging meetings, I want to leave you with a couple quotes from some valuable contributors who have frequently participated in these open triaging meetings. The first is from Sander, who's a frequent user of OpenSearch. He states that the open culture at the project and the open meetings that come with it enable us to interact with the maintainers and the community. Through this, we can see how the community input and interaction develops the project. Sander is a product owner of integration services and product owner of cybersecurity services at a large European research university. We can imagine how having the ability to voice their own issues and project developments with the maintainers is incredibly valuable for a research university running OpenSearch at scale. Similarly, one of our newfound maintainers, Andre from Ivan, offered me this quote. He shared that transparency is the process that allows us to actively engage in discussion and share ideas with the core team, ensuring our voices are heard and valued in shaping the project. To me, as a security plugin maintainer and an open source developer, this brought me a great sense of joy. It represents the ideas of accessibility, collaboration, and decentralization. Andre is able to look at our code. Though he is not affiliated with Amazon or OpenSearch directly, he's an Ivan engineer who is able to look at our code, see what he wants changed. He's then able to collaborate by offering peer review and production, and finally, demonstrate the decentralized nature of OpenSearch as Ivan, another large organization, is shaping the development of the security plugin as they see fit alongside the maintainers representing Amazon or other companies. To me, this exemplifies the open source ideals that OpenSearch represents. Having discussed how we were able to reconcile some of the conflicting goals that security and open source can sometimes have, I want to leave you with a few tips that you can take to get started on your own open triaging meetings. First, you're always welcome to join a full meeting and see how the process goes in an hour. The meetings are hosted weekly at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we welcome any contributors or any community members always. Second, you're always welcome to contact an OpenSearch community organizer, such as Christopher Dame, Nate Boot, or David Tippett. And I'm sure that they're happy to help you get started with your own similar or different process of opening up your repository or project. Finally, after you decide to take these steps, I'd suggest that you start by drafting a document outlining the goals of your meeting. Whether they're for triaging or for something else, it can be helpful to have your thoughts written down and to have a purpose. This helped us dictate our own triaging goals and helped us form the triaging markdown file that now lives on our repository homepage. Regardless of what purpose you use open meetings for, it can be helpful to have a purpose to share with your community so they know why they should attend. Finally, to get you started, I provided a QR code that will take you to the security triaging document, which you're welcome to copy directly and just swap in different terms. Hopefully that'll get you started as fast as possible. And this is the conclusion of my talk. So thank you all for attending.